Cool. So there's a lot of different data sources out there. Why do I include things like DShield in the class? Very simple. There's a lot of open source and public data. It's not the best data in the world. It's not magic. But if you can't process something open source like DShield and can't work through it in a process, you're not going to be successful with a threat feed. So if you're trying to figure out, like, am I ready for a threat feed and can this actually help me and what can I use with it, go pull down a feed that's open source and see if you can put the structure and process into your team to validate questions and answer requirements. If you can, then sort of graduate up a level. Alien Vault OTX, it's a free feed. It's more than a feed, but it's a nice little sharing community. And they've done a lot of good work to increase that sharing community with TLS certs, with insights from other analysts, a lot of good stuff on there. So it's stuff that you can feed directly into your tools and try to play around with that data as well. It's also where you can do those things like the DNS queries of, hey, show me things registered in the last 30 days. Again, not trying to say, this is the best thing ever, look at this vendor. I'm saying this is a free source of data, validate, move it along. Combine is a simple little tool written by Alex Pinto. The whole idea, and Kyle Maxwell, whole idea with Combine is if you've got a bunch of different data sources inside your organization, it's a nice little script that'll combine it all into one feed, deduplicate the data, and remove the RFC 1918 addresses for you. So even though a lot of today is like professional tools, I wanted to throw in like the Python scripts and free stuff out in the community as well to kind of counterbalance it. But neat little tool to deduplicate data. There's also the collective intelligence framework. How many of you use SIF? So here's the key points. For him, for his organization, they already have all their data sources mapped out and figured out. All they're doing is running it through this tool to combine it with other data sources, deduplicate, and pull in other data sources like NetFlow, not even including Intel. Already have their Intel structure mapped out with their sources, and they're using this to bring it together. I unfortunately see a number of teams that spin up to talk about Intel, and they get into this habit of, well, I'm going to need SIF, and I'm going to need MISP, and I'm going to need this, I'm going to need that, I'm going to need that, and they don't have any requirements built. No structure to the Intel team. Stop throwing tools at what is not a tool challenge. This is a really good tool that integrates with a lot of data and can largely act kind of like that orchestration between data sources, but you better already know what you need out of your sources, and you better already know what your sources are. Leveraging OSINTs. You know, this isn't a cyber intel class in the sense of like going and doing collection itself against people, but I do want to say there's some cool tools out there, and there's some things you should do. Like you should leverage open source intelligence against yourself, because you should know the things that an adversary may find about you and utilize in their beginning portions of their own campaign. It's extremely useful. Prioritize what they would learn. As an example, say you have an organization that uses Apache Strut, and you have an executive, hypothetically, that goes to a conference and talks about it at a public conference. And your adversary could probably learn that even through the conference proceedings and videos. And then if vulnerability comes out, reasonably speaking, that adversary might try it. So what are you communicating external to your company, and how might that change the adversary calculus? As an example, for some of you that want to do things on the cheap, there's some cool tools out there. As an example, this is from Tech Defense. It's Automator. From Automator, you basically give it the sites you want to choose things from, and it'll go pull down a bunch of data against those sites. As an example, I can just say Python invoke automator.py, here's a digital hash. And it'll run against VirusTotal, ThreatExpert, VX, it can run it against OTX, and run it through any data source I want, and just do a quick search for me and spit out all the results. So nice little quick tool to use. There's a lot of other tools. Datasploit, as an example, identify credentials and things like API keys. So if you deal with a bunch of cloud-based infrastructure for you, your clients, or your internal customers, I might track my own domains and go see what API keys I can figure out. Maybe things have been dumped in Pastebin or other places that might be useful. Discover, try to find all the different domains, IPs, and things that correlate to each other. Like if I go over here and I say, all right, NSA.gov, what are some host names? Well, here's a lot of host names related to NSA.gov. And what's that weird one? Something.nsa.gov.pl. That's weird. That's interesting. All right, so we go and look at all the things where our domains are popping up. It'll be interesting. Info Go, all the registration and subdomains. So we're using things like domain tools and recorded futures in class, and professional tools generally have more data and they generally can make things faster, but you can do a lot of things with good scripts and just open source tools. You just have to balance analyst time because that's going to be your biggest commodity. Shodan. How many of you have used Shodan? All right. Shodan's an amazing tool. Here's what you can do with it, though. You can take Shodan, Shodan is basically Google for internet-connected devices. You can take Shodan, you can take the API key off of Shodan if you have a premium account. You can pipe that into Maltego. On Maltego, you can give it your CIDR addresses. Say, here's my infrastructure. It'll then populate on the map in Maltego a picture of your infrastructure that's internet connected and enrich it with all the known vulnerabilities and issues off of Shodan. If your infrastructure is popping up on Shodan, it's going to get compromised, guaranteed. Now I have a pretty map to put on the screen, but it's actually got things I can answer questions off of and have tasks against instead of pew-pews for executives. Also, Shodan has a really cool founder, good buddy of mine. So what he's done is he's given us all accounts. So if you want, you can go to shodan.io/sans, register an account. Once you log in with that account, the account you have already is fine as well. Go back to that link, shodan.io/sans. It will upgrade your account for free to a premium account with API access for life. It's a good deal. Do that. GCHQ's CyberChef. Anybody ever use CyberChef? Yes. How do you use CyberChef? Base 64. That's one. That's a good use case. I've got a lot of base 64 data. I'm going to use CyberChef to decode the encoding. What else? Some basic reverse engineering. You can do it as well. Anybody else use it? Have some use cases? All right. Y'all need to go check out this tool. CyberChef is effectively a series of scripts, and it's mostly dealing with encoding, decoding, and passing keys back and forth in data, where say I have some encrypted traffic, but I know the SSL cert. Or I've got XORed off data, but I've got the encoding. Or I've got SHA-256 type encryption, but I know the key. Anything that I want to, at scale, go through and unobfuscate or unencrypt, I can do through CyberChef. CyberChef, more importantly, can start linking up to other tools and pull in those data sets for you and start combining it, slicing it, dicing it like a chef. The cool thing about this is I never thought this was going to get released. This was a tool I used on a daily basis back in the NSA, but GCHQ is really cool about actually releasing tools. This was one of the tools we used a lot that I'm sure had some PowerPoint leak somewhere about CyberChef is this magic thing they use to spy on the world. No, it's like Python, but it's really good, really good. Geographical information and maps. This one's more eye candy than anything, but if you're dealing with personas and tracking people and things like that, it might be useful. It's called Dual Maps, and what it allows you to do is really simple. What it allows you to do in one browser is have the satellite view, the street view, and the map view all in one. And I really like that, yeah. All right, Maltego. Maltego is a great tool. Maltego is a way for us to actually visually represent this. We're going to use it in two labs. We use it for TLS pivoting, we're going to use it for visualization. Whole idea behind Maltego is a nice way to do link analysis and pivots. Effectively, Maltego uses transforms. Transforms are data sources. That's all they are. Just another word for a data source. And in the transforms, they've got data sources that are made for social media, and Google data, and VirusTotal, and they have a lot of regular transforms. But you can also plug in your professional tools, domain tools, recorded future, passive, total, whatever. You can plug in the API key and also have it in there. So in the lab, you're going to log in. You'll end up installing the ThreatCrowd transform, which is a public transform that pulls the public data of VirusTotal, Malware.com, and a couple other places together. You will then be able to input a data set or like a value like an IP address and pivot off of that against those data sources. In this case, if I just have this IP address and I click IP owner details, it'll tell me here's a number, here's where it's located, and here's the emails. And as we've learned, where it's located on here has nothing to do where it's actually probably physically located. But it's interesting choices sometimes with domain name registration. There we go. Threat Crowd is going to have also user submissions in it. So you've got to sort of weigh that carefully. Some of the data in there is user generated, which is nice to amplify the view, but it doesn't necessarily mean all that data is good. What you're going to do in the lab is you will have this nice view of what Maltego looks like. These 3 black bubbles up here, these gray bubbles, this is basically your start button. So when you hit the main menu, you'll have an ability to open a new graph. You can also do it just from this icon right here. The result setting is set at 255 for the free version, but I don't know that you should really ever do above 255 anyways. I don't know of any reason that you'll have like 10,000 items that you want to return off a search. It's just not going to be useful. Machines are basically scripts to automate queries that you run maybe every day. You don't need to use that in the lab either. Your big use in the lab will be click the button, open a graph. Good job. Then the hard part comes. You're going to have a view off to the left, and underneath the little icons, you can click whatever you want to use, like infrastructure, and you'll have like an IPv4 address as an example. You will click, hold, drag, release. All right, hold on. Click, hold, drag, release. It's on the test. No. All right, so you're going to do that, and then you'll get it over to the map. On the map, you'll put in whatever IP address you want. You can just double-click it and put in IP address or whatever. And when you right-click that new asset, it'll have all of these buttons. The ones at the bottom are about manipulating the data that's selected, like a new graph or removing it from the graph, especially if it's bad data. The ones in gray are the data sources, transforms. Let me run a new transform. The little yellow double arrow means run. But I don't want to ever really run all transforms. I want to drill down into exactly what data I want to run against it. Like maybe I only want to run the threat crowd data against it. So if I run everything at once, I'm not going to know what I'm going to get in return. Exercise 3.2, I've given you tons of data off of that poison ivy stuff, and you're going to go pivot around and find some new data. Really, what you're going to find is new malware samples. You'll find some new malware samples, and you'll find some personas of the adversaries behind the intrusion into Acme Electronics. Exercise 3.3, here's your lead-in, because we're going to jump right back into a lab. So we've been working this nice structured temporal rift intrusion set, potentially a campaign at this point, depending on how we want to define it. But we've got this temporal rift thing going on. But of course, life, it sort of finds a way. We're not going to be able to sit there and just work happily on one set. Nope, we got a new request. So coming in, we get a call. Here our team's been nicely working, but we get sideswiped, sidetracked. This is the most real thing I can do for any Intel analyst. Anyway, so you get sideswiped. And an information sharing organization has discovered a new threat. Specifically, it's targeting point of sales systems, POS systems. And all they have is an IP address, or not even an IP address, it's domain. All they have is a command and control server, and it's systeminfo u48.ru. So you got this domain they can throw at you. That's all they have. So at this point in time, we as the cyber threat intelligence team try to figure out how we would use this. And instead of making you start from square zero and do the whole kill chain thing again, I'm just going to speed us up real quick on this. So what we would do is we'd go out and see if there's any other information on it. There's nothing. At this point in time, there's no public reporting, nothing to help us, so we really got to look at our own data. So we're going to do discovery, but we decided to do detect first. Say, okay, enterprise security team, can you put out a search, can you put out a detection rule for this domain? So they do. They put out a signature that's looking for HTTP and HTTPS sessions connecting to that domain. They find nothing. So we say, all right, we'll just go ahead and put out a detection on the domain writ large. Even if we don't have anything historically, just go ahead and put out that detection. And immediately it comes back. We get a packet capture. We're kind of puzzled and perplexed at this point. So we get a packet capture. So we get that packet capture back, and why didn't we see it previously? Why did our query come up with nothing? Yeah, wrong protocol. DNS, not HTTP, not HTTPS. Very simple thing. I know it seems like I'm pandering at this point, but it's a very important thing. If you give a request to other teams, they're going to interpret it based off of how they view the world. Like, hey, my job is proxy logs. My job is firewall rules. My job is... So make sure you are very descriptive. Hey, here's the ports. Here's the protocols. Here's what I'm looking for. In depth if you have a requirement. Anyways, but we also have some victim information now, potentially. 172.16.1.105, and we have the 75, 75, 75, 75 domains. That's interesting. Or IP address. That's interesting. But the victim, if we're compromised at all, don't know yet, but if we are, it might be a good place to start. So we send the IR team there. Just a quick hit IR team, not even declaring it an incident yet. But we ask them, can you go and take an image and tell us what's on the system? So they do, and they take an image of it with red line, and they say, hey, no active initiated connections. There's nothing active on this system. But there's some process strings that do look like they have another command and control domain in there. And there's this rogue process, which is temp defrag.scr. What are SCR files? Screensavers, yeah. Yeah, or viruses, yeah. Almost always viruses. You really shouldn't have screensaver files. So we take a look at the red line view, and they're right. Helpdesk 7.ru is on there. That matches the pattern. It's not a big pattern. At this point, it's just the RU aspect of it. But the fact is, in our data set, that's relatively unique because we don't have a lot of Russian-based domains coming off of our POS. We also see the PHP file. But look here. It's not systeminfo48.ru. It's just istem because it got carved out in the volatile data that is memory. So if we would have created a host-based indicator and ran it across all of our systems, it would have come back saying nothing's wrong. Understanding how your data works and sort of the volatile nature of your data is critical to ever using indicators. So it was useful that we went a little bit deeper. And we see the defrag, and god dang it, Scott Sanders. It's always Scott Sanders. Anyway, so Scott Sanders is here, infected with something crazy. We say, malware analyst, please take a look at this. Here's this file off the memory image. Can you help us out? So we give them the information. They give us a hash of it. We say, thanks so much. Tell us what's going on. They say, well, the malware, it takes credit card data off the systems. POS system, credit card data, makes sense. Encrypts it, and then exfiltrates it out. Okay, so we might be able to look for encrypted traffic leaving a POS system. Gotcha. And file transfers that may be larger leaving the network than they are coming in. Good to know. Good things. Cool. They show us the sandbox kind of output. We see HTTP requests to things like Windows Update. Here's my kind of trick question for you. Is that request useful to you? Why or why not? Yes. Why is it useful? I have user agents that I might be able to look on, but also just the very nature of that Windows Update beaconing type activity off my system, maybe that's abnormal for POS systems in my environment. And if it is, it's not necessarily a malicious indicator, but it's an indicator. Hey, I expect when this thing gets infected with something, it's going to start reaching out to these types of domains. If I share this in my sharing group, everyone's going to hate me, but it might be useful in my own environment. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, we also see systeminfo48.ru at the time is registered to this IP address, or associated with this IP address, and it is using port 443, which goes to the whole exfiltrated encrypted data. Good to go. Oh, and we also know that there's some VBS scripts, so some Visual Basic scripts are running. And we also know there's this wsscript.exe. So we've got some other files that are ongoing that we might want to be on the lookout for. So we consolidate it all up. We've been asking teams to give us data, but we're tracking it. We're the ones pulling it together. So that's what we do. Just from that single indicator, very quickly, we can say, look, on the installation phase, there's SCV host, there's temp defrag source, there's VBS scripts, and there's this victim IP address, which I use in italics. This is the victim IP address consistent with in kill chain stage 6, which is command and control. DNS queries, that IP address, help desk 7RU, HTTPS, and the detection phase, I had the system info 48.ru. So really quickly, I can get up to speed with understanding where I am. But now, I go back out with new information that I have and find that there is some reporting at this point in time to help me out. Specifically, I see out of that sandbox, it says McAfee calls it Evelton POS. Now remember, because I got a vendor name and because I got a malware name, they probably wrote a report on it. So I can go find it, and that's what you're going to do, but you're going to find a lot more. So what I want you to do in the next lab is you're going to use Recorded Future. It's a massive OSINT tool. You can do things without it, but it is a massive OSINT tool. And the purpose is to be able to distill through massive amounts of data to still find and answer a question. So I'm throwing you in the deep end, but I have a more structured question this time. My more structured question is to help me fill out the rest of that kill chain view so I can pass it off to the defenders. So can I get from external reporting, now that I understand 6 and 5, can I get 7 and 4? Can I maybe add in 3? Can I add in how it gets delivered to my environment and what it does so defenders can use it? So when you go into Recorded Future and log in, you're going to have this search bar. And the UI changes every now and then. Don't freak out. But there's always a search bar. It might be in the middle of the page or something. But when you go into that search bar, you can type in something like Evelton. In this scenario, I'm typing in Sophisy. And again, I've unfortunately picked on Russia a lot in like the recording. I always pick on a different country, sometimes US as well. But, you know, all right, Sophisy is in there. So Sophisy. And it'll say like, hey, do you mean the domain, the hashtag? No, I mean the threat actor, specifically Fancy Bear, Pawn Storms, you know, all the different names for it. You go, okay, so I click on that. And then it's going to pop up a bunch of data. Here's what I want you to focus on. As you get all this massive amount of data, remember the question you're trying to answer. So if I'm trying to answer things like additional kill chain phases, I might be interested in the timeline bubble to see when a lot of reporting has been done on this intrusion. And the outliers may not be super interesting to me. I might want to check them out to see what the earliest reporting is. But maybe the beginning of that bubble is more of the consistent information. So I could view timeline and map and all that, but I also want this context. They have these little context cards. And say, hey, look, here's a lot of the hashes that have been mentioned. Like these hashes are mentioned in context with Sophisy. And so I might click on one, or click on an IP address, or click on a domain, and it's going to bring up a card on that domain or IP address or whatever I click. And it'll have risk scores and all that, and that's fine, but more importantly, in this case, I want the references. Because, okay, this hash has been seen in conjunction with this piece of malware, or in this case, this threat actor. Where is it being pulled from? Well, here's APT notes, fantastic tool. Here's APT notes. And it's specifically talking about this hash in context of this threat actor. And I can start to pull those references. So in essence, it's like Google, but Google already predefined and pre-tagged data so I can pivot off of it more quickly to find exactly what I need to in context of what I'm searching for. And of course, I can export things out to CSV or whatever, but I won't in this scenario. So what I want you to do in this lab is you're going to take the data that we have from there you go. Perfect. I thought it was temporal reference, I'm telling you. Now you need to enrich your data for Evelton. Good, yeah. So we're focusing on Evelton. You're going to take your data as it relates to Evelton that I gave you and go look for the ability to fill out that rest of that kill chain view. That's your assignment. Good luck. So we should have been able to go through, record a future, should have seen a lot of things, click all the buttons, analyze all the things. What do we see? What was interesting? What was useful? What did you find? Let's actually focus on that first. What did you find? Super helpful. I could pivot off a data point, find something useful, get to a report that's right within context. Not just the highest priority Google SEO, but right in context. What are some things that we learned around kill chain data? There's a phishing campaign component. Absolutely. So we know that a variety of them have been delivered via phishing emails. What are some components of the phishing campaign? Absolutely. Searching for jobs, CVs, there's resumes that they're sending in. How did it get on the system? What was the exploitation factor? Macros in Word documents. You could say social engineering. You could say macros. You could technically say nothing. I know, this is a big one. You could say that nothing got installed to the system after exploitation. Because technically it's a macro that reaches out. It runs. So you could say it's macros, but if you wanted to, you could also say nothing. And which one's right? It doesn't matter. As long as you're consistent. As long as you're consistent, it works for you. Good. Anything else? We didn't have stage 7 before. We kind of had some understanding what the malware could do. But what do we learn in stage 7, actions and objectives? Yeah, it was scraping credit cards out of where? Out of memory. So maybe a lot of the analysis we need to do is bound to memory forensics, which should tell us which resources on the security team we'd need to pull to analyze this. More of that targeteering. Good. And the more that I can structure the data and put it into like cards and dashboards and things of like, here's how I start in the morning and the type of queries I run, that can be useful as well. So what did we learn? Well, just like you said, kill chain 1, we had nothing observed. Kill chain 2, for weaponization, we had the Word documents, usually with CV or resume. They were delivered via phishing emails. They had macros inside them. I'm going to say there was no installation. Eventually there was. Later on, but right up front. Now, I normally would, but I just wanted to show a different way of doing it. But I'm going to say in this one, no installation. Then I'm going to say kill chain 6, command and control out to an IP address and downloads dro.exe. But Rob, you said just classify the second stage in here. Again, just want to show you a different way. You can do it any way you want. I normally would put the macros in 5 and the dro.exe in 5 underneath it. Normally. But you can do it however you are consistent. Whichever makes sense to you. It's just a model. I make a tree out of it, yeah. But you can do it however you want. And then kill chain stage 7, encrypt and exfil out data of the credit cards. Cool. Here's my view of the world when it comes to threat feeds. I don't mind them. They can be helpful. What's not helpful is you acquiring a threat feed without understanding why you need it. Very simple. If you say, I want the data, you're going to get a bunch of data, and it's going to get you to ask a lot of questions that you can't answer. Here's my rule of thumb for threat feeds. If I'm going to use a threat feed at all, and this is really just any data set, but if I'm going to use a threat feed at all, I have to know where that data is coming from. So I should be able to go to the vendor and go, where is your data collection coming from? And no squirrely answer, they should be able to tell me things like, we focus a lot on cybercrime, or we focus a lot on national level exploitation and espionage into academic institutions. They should give me an understanding of their sourcing, not detailed level of sourcing, because everyone's sensitive to that, but also, is it sandboxes? Is it honeypots? Is it intrusion data? Is it malware focused? What's the distribution of your data? And I think that's actually a reasonable question. Show me a pie chart with a, some guesstimate of distribution in your data so I have a decent understanding of what I'm ingesting. Because it can help me understand what types of questions I can ask against the data. Nothing's wrong with honeypots. Not the best source in the world, but there's nothing wrong with it. What would an example of question be different between honeypot data versus sandbox data? So the sandbox, I'm going to get the first stage malware. It's going to execute and maybe really good insight. Nothing's wrong with it. But in the honeypot, if it's well built and focused on my industry, maybe I get some follow-on actions. Maybe I get first stage and second stage. Everybody in the world loves to peddle that first stage anything. That second stage, that's the money. Show me what's going on. So these data sources can reveal different types of questions. So number one, I need to know, where's the data coming from? Is the threat data applicable to the type of threats my organization cares about? That's number two. So to answer that, you got to have a threat model. Then you got to figure out what actually matters to you, right? So that's where I want to see that a vendor tells me they focus on dark web stuff. Maybe for whatever reason, I'm really big into dark web, looking for contracts and credit cards and things like that, and I care. I care about dark web. So knowing that's where they do collection, number one, can help me understand what type of threats they track, number two, and whether or not it's relevant for me. There is no such thing as general threat intelligence. The entirety of the market would love you to believe there is because they want to be able to sell intel to everybody. We are going to see within the next couple years a hyper specialization in intel teams because it's not working as general threat intel. And how's the threat data going to be used? Do I need a blacklist because my use case is to throw data against the proxy? Well, now I want a vendor who has a much bigger focus on true positives than larger data sets. But is my focus to go hunting and enrich my own insights? Well, I don't want the vendor to pre-filter the true positive, false positive ratio because I want the interconnected data sets. So I have to make choices on how I'm going to use it, which should replicate into where they're getting and using the data. The other thing I'll say, I don't know if I say it in another one, but the other thing I'll say is I always want to be able to pivot into a higher level of context if I'm going to do analysis at all. So if the use case is throw it into a SIEM and just enrich stuff that's there, or the use case is throw it into a blacklist for the proxy, fine. But if I'm going to do intrusion analysis, if I'm going to do an investigation and use this data, I want a higher level of context, which means I should be able to take anything in that vendor threat feed and pivot through a portal or the UI, whatever, but pivot into a blog or a snippet or something. So the vendor should be forced to write, usually what happens is they'll write like a little diary of sort, like a little snippet or blog. They'll dump the indicators into the feed. I could use those if I need, but they're also going to continue on if it's important and write a report. So I might go down and back up in terms of higher order context. But if it's a data feed that just has threat data and I can't pivot to anything, well, they didn't care about it, why should I, right? It's not giving me anything to answer questions off of. So those are some of the ways that I measure threat feeds to figure out if they're going to be useful to me. Threat feeds are highly bastardized. It's like, just throw this data against the wall and see what happens. But there are legitimate use cases if they can measure against those things. Like I said, measuring threat feeds, we went through all of the stuff in the pros, but on the right, two other expectations. If it ever contains those RFC 1918 addresses or domains like Microsoft.com, just cancel it. It's going to cost you more in the long run. For those of you that don't know what a pew-pew map is, let's do a quick little exercise. Let's do this. I want everybody, including you on demand, or I want everybody, go to Google, not Bing. Come on, let's do it. Go to Google. Google.com. AskJeeves.com. No, go to Google. Type in cyber attack map. Come on, play along. Cyber attack map. Go to cyber attack map on Google, and maybe like 4 or 5 links down. Always pick on a different vendor every class. Let's pick on FireEye today. No threat but. No threat but. Go to a real one, because I'm going to ask you to do something that's real. So go to a real one. Let's pick on FireEye today. They all do it. But go to Google, cyber attack map, about 4 or 5 links down. There should be one for FireEye. Click on it, open it up. I'm going to wait until everyone, I'm going to look. I'm going to wait until everyone's got it open. Don't be the guy that holds up the glass, or gal. Going to wait. All right. Got some pews. I see some pews. Pew, 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 pew. See it? There's a real request. Don't worry, it's coming. All right, here's my real request for you. I want you all to turn off your Wi-Fi. Oh my God, it's predictive. Yeah. Here's the answer. It's fake. It's crap. It's wrong. Stop putting this in front of your executives, your SOC, your IR people, your analysts. Stop doing it. You're teaching them to be stupid. Here's my story for you. Everything always comes with a story. Here's a story. I helped build out a security operations center somewhere in the Middle East. We're going to abstract it. It was a first of its kind in the region, dealing with industrial controls. First of its kind in the region. And so it was a real big investment with royal family buy-in. The royal family wanted to come see this SOC when it was opening up. And I'm just the vendor. And I'm like, hey man, here's my recommendations. Do these things, don't do these things. One of the things I said is, don't have a attack map. Don't do it. When President Obama gets on stage and has one behind him, it makes him look incompetent. Don't do it to your executives. So, what do? Thank you, Rob, for your wonderful input. Don't care. Pew pew, baby. All right, so they put up that cyber attack map. And at the time, this country was hypersensitive to US relations. Hypersensitive. So when they come in, the royal family comes in, a couple members of the royal family come in, not the whole royal family, come in, and one of the princes sees not all the analysts doing work on their laptops and PCs, not all the money and effort put into the actual analysts and the curriculum and everything they're doing, but instead, the cyber attack map gravitates toward it like lights in the bug, right to it. What is this? And all of a sudden the SOC director that I've counseled on not doing this, sir, this is the finest intelligence that money can buy. This is Western intelligence that does instant attribution. Anyways, instant attribution. He's like, oh, wow. It's all bought in. And then all of a sudden, from that country to the United States, pew! According to that SOC director, that royal family member now understands that their country just attacked the United States at this sensitive time. Immediately, who was that? You just educated your executive on exactly what that was for. And I wish it had a really happy story, but what effectively happened is instead of backing off and saying, my bad, doubled down and said, we'll find him. Gave one of his folks a credit card for the weekend and said, hey, have fun, go party, find me somebody to deport next week. And that's what they did. They found somebody, charged him with the crime, and deported him out of the country. Don't do that. Please don't train your people to be stupid. It's not that the data is wrong. So always somebody comes back and says, but Rob, we put real data in ours. It's not about the data, it's about the visualization is useless. It doesn't help you anything. No anybody has ever stood there to go, oh, I guess I'm just bored today, but oh my God, a cyber attack! I'm ready. Like, nobody's waiting for that. What do we got? What do we see? Hopefully you're able to find some value in this tool. I think Maltego is a pretty sweet tool. Has huge limitations though. One huge limitation is it generally, it doesn't generally, but our types of tools like this do not have a temporal element to them. So I would love the tool that allowed me to take a slide bar and just drag it across time and see changes in my data based off that time. It doesn't exist in any of these tools. However, there is a company, Cambridge Intelligence, not Cambridge Analytica, but Cambridge Intelligence, and they create like temporal analysis software. You could always go create and home grow your own solution off of something like that with data analysis. And a lot of the data science tools that people use are pretty interesting on the temporal element, so you can kind of bake them in with your data sets. But to my knowledge, none of the professional tools, Maltego or whatever, allow you to do that temporal analysis. I do think it's a big weakness, but it's still a really effective tool. So what are some ways, what are some things in the lab that you found that were new, that were cool, based off what we could find in Maltego? Do we have any new samples of malware? Yeah, definitely, quite a few. So we definitely got a couple of new samples to look at, so that's great. But did we have any personas that formed? Maybe so, some things to look for. And it's up to you if you define them as a persona yet, but we have some names of some characters that we could look for to see if it popped up or that naming convention popped up again in our intrusions. Because before we had that leet star, leet staff thing, but now we've got some of these Russian names. Doesn't mean they're Russian, but just some names. And we might be able to go back across our data set and look for Russian themed names and see if that pattern pops up again. And it's always like this with intrusion analysis, where we'll go forward, we'll find something, and then we'll have to go back and look at our data sets again. It's this idea that it always feels like we're putting, one step forward, two steps back, but what it is we're adding more context and knowledge to the data set that we've always had, but now we're seeing new things and new insights in it. So what are some ways that you use Maltego currently, or some insights into how you could use it based off what you see here? Smash it. No, that's not good. What else? Yes. Breaking out your views across the different intrusions you're working instead of just combining all the data together. Working each of those intrusions to find if there's interesting data points and to see what correlates across each other, maybe in an activity group. It's a great use case. Again, I don't like analysts to just go and say, show me the data. Just Maltego populate for me. I'd rather you go in looking for something, and it is a visual tool. So your requirements going into it should be visual. If it's just let me correlate this data, you can do it in any other tool you have. Elk, Splunk, SIM, I don't care. You can do that type of structured correlation better, faster, more automated in other tools. But I need to be able to see a visual link between other disparate sets of data. That's where the visual analysis of Maltego can be useful. So he mentioned that what their organization's doing is making their own internal transforms off of their own internal data sets, and now I can correlate it with the external transforms and external data sets, as well as also seeing my own visual internal data. Yeah, it's a great use case.